It was late June in Portland, the kind of summer that makes the whole city smell like roasted coffee beans and food carts sizzling on every corner. My name is Sable Ortega. I'm 28, owner of La Llama Roja, a bright red food truck that looks like a matchbox someone set on fire. I built it from nothing, just a loan I barely qualified for, a recipe binder from my grandmother, and a stubborn streak big enough to feed half of Oregon. My thing? Fusion. I take Mexican roots and twist them through flavors I've picked up while traveling. Korean bulgogi tacos, mango miso tamales, churros dipped in Vietnamese coffee sauce. People either loved it or looked at me sideways. But the ones who loved it, they came back. Summer is everything for Portland food trucks. The Rose City Summer Festival is like our Olympics. One weekend can make your rent for 3 months. And last year, I was on fire. Lines down the block, regulars bringing their friends, food critics dropping my name on Instagram like I was the next big thing. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the year I finally get ahead. But if I've learned anything, it's that success paints a target on your back. His name was Trent. Slick hair, expensive sneakers, that smug energy of a guy who thinks Yelp stars are the currency of heaven. He owned a truck called Fork and Flame, but his menu had always been boring. Cheeseburger sliders, mac and cheese bowls, the usual festival food. Until one morning I walked past his truck on my way to set up, and froze. There it was, right on his chalkboard menu. Bulgogi tacos, mango miso tamales, churros with Vietnamese coffee dip, my exact dishes, word for word. At first, I thought maybe it was a joke. Maybe someone hacked his menu board. But when I looked inside his truck, I saw his cooks prepping the same marinades I had spent months perfecting. I felt my chest tighten, like someone had reached into my ribs and twisted. That day, my line was shorter. People glanced at my menu, then drifted toward his. A few even said, "Oh, cool. I tried this at Fork and Flame last night. It's amazing." I wanted to scream. You tried it at my place first. It was mine. But in food, originality is smoke. You can't prove you owned an idea unless you trademark every taco shell you touch. And Trent knew it. A week later, my Yelp page started filling with 1-star reviews. Food was cold. Service was rude. Got sick after eating here. Lies. All lies. I recognized some of the usernames. They were the same ones giving Fork and Flame glowing 5-star praise. I reported it. Yelp shrugged. We can't verify fake activity. And just like that, my rating dropped. My line shrank to nothing. I'd stand inside my truck, staring at tubs of marinated meat I couldn't sell, hearing the sound of Trent's booming voice outside. Fork and Flame. Portland's hottest fusion truck. Except no imitations. Imitations. The word made bile rise in my throat. I'd go home at night to my tiny studio apartment, hands reeking of garlic and despair, and wonder if maybe everyone was right. Maybe I wasn't original. Maybe I was just another wannabe chef with ideas too messy to survive. The bills piled up. My landlord called twice about late rent. My truck insurance was due. My grandmother's recipe binder sat on the counter like an accusation. You said you'd honor me. You said you'd carry this forward. What are you doing letting him win? One Saturday evening, I pulled up to the festival route and saw something that almost knocked me to my knees. Trent had plastered giant banners on his truck. Portland's original Fusion Street Eats. Original. People were lined up 50 deep, taking selfies with his neon sign, tagging him as the pioneer of flavors I'd been bleeding for. A local food blogger was filming a segment right there, microphone in hand, gushing about his creativity. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My ears buzzed, my vision narrowed. And for the first time, I didn't feel sadness. I felt rage. Pure, clean rage. That night, I sat alone in my truck after closing. The streets were quiet, the city lights reflecting off the metal counters. I whispered out loud, just to hear it in the air. He thinks he can steal my work and bury me. I leaned forward, palms flat on the counter. But I'm not done. Not yet. And that's when the idea hit me. Messy, dangerous, maybe even impossible. But it felt alive in a way I hadn't felt in months. Not just survival, not just fighting back. Something bigger. I grabbed my notebook, flipped to a clean page, and started writing the first words of a plan. A plan that could expose Trent for the fraud he was. A plan that could remind Portland who really created these flavors. A plan that, if I pulled it off, might save me, or destroy me completely. I set my pen down, heart pounding, and just as I started sketching out the details, my phone buzzed. A notification, a direct message, from a name I hadn't seen in years. I froze, because if this message was what I thought it was, it could change everything. The notification pulsed on my phone screen like a heartbeat. I stared at it, thumb hovering, afraid to open it, but more afraid not to. The name read, Julian Reyes. It had been years. Julian and I went to culinary school together. He was always the quiet one, scribbling notes like a mad scientist, blending flavors no sane instructor thought would work. We'd bonded over being outsiders, two kids who didn't quite fit the French fine dining mold. Last I'd heard, he'd moved to Seattle, writing reviews for some underground food zine. He had a palate that could destroy careers or launch them into the stratosphere. I unlocked the message. It said, Sable. I've been watching the festival scene. I know what Trent did. And I know you're the original. Call me. I think I can help. I read it 3 times, my chest tightening with something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. But there was also fear. If Julian knew, that meant people were talking. And in the food world, perception is everything. I dialed his number before I could overthink it. He picked up on the first ring. Ortega, he said, voice warm but urgent. Tell me you're not giving up. My throat ached, but I managed to whisper, not yet. We met 2 nights later at a dive bar lit by neon beer signs and the smell of fried pickles. Julian slid into the booth across from me, dropping a leather-bound notebook thicker than a dictionary onto the table. He leaned in. Food is memory. You can't fake it forever. People know when something's real. I shook my head. Tell that to the 50 people lined up at Fork and Flame last week. That's smoke. He's blowing smoke. You've got fire. The way he said it made my stomach flip. Then he opened his notebook, revealing pages of scribbled maps, festival schedules, and names I recognized. Local food bloggers, critics, even a TV producer who'd once filmed a special on Portland's food scene. Julian tapped the page. You don't fight him on his turf. You make your own. A pop-up tasting tour, limited seats, secret locations, curated nostalgia. You invite the people who matter. You remind them that these dishes were yours before he ever touched them. I blinked. That's insane. He grinned. Exactly. And it'll work. I went home that night and stared at my grandmother's recipe binder. The pages were grease-stained, corners folded, handwritten notes in the margins. A pop-up tour meant money I didn't have. Renting venues, buying ingredients, maybe even hiring staff. I was already drowning. But what was the alternative? Watch Trent build an empire on my back? I traced my grandmother's faded handwriting with my finger. She'd crossed the border with nothing but recipes in her head, building a life one tortilla at a time. If she could do it, so could I. I sold my TV, pawned the bracelet my ex had given me years ago, called in favors from friends I hadn't spoken to in months. By the end of the week, I had just enough cash to rent a tiny warehouse space near the river for one night. Julian pulled strings with his contacts. Within days, he'd secured RSVPs from 3 food bloggers, a podcaster, and, this blew my mind, a critic from the Portland Gazette. The event would be small, intimate, but if it worked, the ripples could shatter Trent's illusion. The night before the pop-up, I prepped like a soldier before battle. Stacks of tortillas, marinades soaking through the night, churro dough resting under damp cloths. Every scent filled the warehouse until it smelled like a dream I'd almost forgotten. But in the quiet moments, fear crept in. What if no one showed? What if the critics hated it? What if they believed Trent's version of the story? I caught myself staring at my reflection in the steel counters. My eyes looked tired, but underneath was something harder. "I'm not going down like this," I whispered. The next evening, guests began arriving. Bloggers snapping photos of the raw brick walls and string lights we'd hung to make the warehouse feel less like, well, a warehouse. The Gazette critic arrived, expression unreadable, already jotting notes in a little black book. I forced a smile, plating dishes like my life depended on it. Because it did. Halfway through the tasting, Julian slipped over to me, looking pale. "You're not going to believe this," he muttered. "What?" He tilted his head toward the door. And there he was. Trent. Slick hair, smug grin, arms crossed as if he owned the room. My stomach dropped. He strutted forward, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Cute little event you've got here, Ortega. Too bad you're just serving knockoffs of my menu." The room went still. All eyes turned to me. I felt my pulse in my ears, my hands shaking as I gripped the edge of the counter. This was it. The moment he wanted to humiliate me, to erase me in front of the very people I needed most. I took a breath, forcing my voice steady. Funny. I was just about to tell them the story of where these dishes came from. Gasps rippled across the room, and in that silence, I knew. The fight had officially begun. The room was a pressure cooker. The string lights buzzed faintly above us, the scent of bulgogi beef and fried dough hanging thick in the air. Trent smirked at me, waiting. The critics and bloggers leaned forward in their folding chairs like a jury ready to hand down a verdict. My hands wanted to shake. My throat wanted to close. But something inside me hardened. I wasn't going to let him control the narrative anymore. I stepped out from behind the counter, wiping my palms on my apron. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice louder than I expected. "Every dish you're tasting tonight has a story. These flavors didn't just appear on a menu board one day. They're pieces of my life." I held up a plate of mango miso tamales. This recipe came from my grandmother's masa, mixed with flavors I picked up working in a Japanese kitchen during college. The churros. They're hers too, but I paired them with Vietnamese coffee after a trip through Hanoi. My bulgogi tacos? Born out of a late-night kitchen experiment with friends, when we were broke but curious. I turned to face Trent, locking eyes. "These aren't knockoffs. They're mine." Trent scoffed, loud enough for the room to hear. Cute speech. But food isn't about stories, it's about execution. And let's be real, Ortega, people come to me because I do it better. A ripple of discomfort moved through the audience. A blogger whispered to her friend. The Gazette critic didn't look up from his notes. Julian shot me a look from across the room. Steady, grounding. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't just talk. I had to prove it. I stepped back behind the counter and grabbed a skillet, the metal clanging sharp against the stove. "Then let's cook," I said. "Right here. Right now." Gasps. Murmurs. Cameras clicked as bloggers whipped out their phones. Trent laughed, but there was a flicker in his eyes. Hesitation. "Unless you're scared?" I added, tilting my head. He set his jaw. "Fine." And just like that, it became a showdown. The warehouse filled with the sounds of sizzling meat, the clatter of knives, the rush of adrenaline. I moved on instinct, grinding spices, tossing aromatics into hot oil, the scent of garlic and ginger exploding through the air. Every move felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Trent fumbled more than once. His marinades were too salty, his tortillas unevenly grilled. But he covered it with cocky banter, cracking jokes to the crowd. I stayed silent, letting the food speak. When I plated the tacos, perfectly seared bulgogi layered with pickled radish and chili crema, I slid them toward the critic. "Try this," I said simply. The critic lifted one taco, eyes narrowing as he took a bite. Chewing slowly, thoughtfully. The room held its breath. Finally, he set it down and picked up one of Trent's. A bite. Another pause. Then, he looked at me. "This," he said, pointing to my plate, "is balanced. Inventive. Alive." He shifted his gaze to Trent. "Yours feels like an imitation. Forced." A murmur swept through the crowd, like a tide turning. For the first time, Trent's smile cracked. One of the bloggers whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I remember having these from Sable's truck last summer." These were hers first. Another chimed in. "Yeah, I wrote about her churros months before Fork and Flame even offered them." Phones lit up, thumbs tapping furiously. Hashtags were already being born in real time. Hashtag culinary integrity. Hashtag forked over. Hashtag Sable's originals. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Not from shame, but from something I hadn't felt in months. Vindication. Trent's voice rose, sharper now. "She's lying. She's making this up to get sympathy. Everyone knows food can't be copyrighted. If she was really that good, why is she throwing pop-ups instead of running a successful truck?" The words hit me like daggers because there was truth buried in them. I had been struggling. I was barely holding it together. But before I could respond, Julian stepped forward. "Because she's building something authentic," he said firmly. "And authenticity outlasts marketing." The room applauded. Trent's face flushed red. He stormed toward the door, muttering under his breath, but not before someone shouted after him, "Hey, Trent! Ever try winning with your own ideas?" Laughter erupted. By the time the event ended, my hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush of victory. Critics shook my hand. Bloggers asked for interviews. The Gazette critic promised to write something honest. Julian clapped me on the shoulder. "Told you. You've still got fire." But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Trent wasn't the type to slink away quietly. He had money, connections, and an ego too inflated to let this humiliation slide. And I had just declared war. The pop-up had been a success. For the first time in weeks, I went to bed smiling. But I should have known better. In Portland's food scene, momentum is fragile. And when you humiliate someone like Trent in public, you don't just walk away with a win. You make yourself a target. 2 mornings later, I pulled up to my food truck only to find a bright orange paper taped to the windshield. My stomach sank. I'd passed inspections for 2 years straight, spotless. But when I called the health department, they rattled off a list of anonymous complaints: unsanitary conditions, improper food storage, cross-contamination. All lies. Yet the inspector showed up that afternoon, clipboard in hand, poking through my truck with a flashlight like he was hunting for cockroaches. He didn't find anything, but the damage was done. The sight of that orange paper had already been photographed and shared. By evening, a food gossip account on Instagram had posted, "Is La Llama Roja going up in flames?" Rumors of health code violations swirl. The comments section burned hotter than my grill. Business slowed again. People are quick to believe the worst, especially when a cheaper, shinier alternative is parked a block away. I tried to push through, keeping my head down, serving the customers who still believed in me. But every plate felt heavier, every smile harder to fake. At night, I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was in over my head. Julian tried to keep me steady. He's desperate. That means you're winning. But desperation can still crush you. The next week, another post went viral. Breaking, Fork and Flame negotiating to open a brick-and-mortar downtown. Investors lining up. I scrolled through the photos of Trent shaking hands with men in suits, champagne glasses raised. He looked untouchable. One comment stabbed me in the gut. Finally, a true innovator putting Portland fusion food on the map. My innovation. My food. My life. One night, I parked my truck near the waterfront, serving maybe a handful of loyal customers. When the last one left, I sat on the curb outside, staring at the empty park across the street. The river shimmered under the moonlight. My apron was stained, my hands raw from chopping, my spirit cracked. What if I just quit? The thought whispered louder than I wanted to admit. I could sell the truck, cut my losses, disappear. Nobody would remember. Nobody would care. But then I pulled my grandmother's recipe binder from my bag. I flipped through the worn pages, the ink smudged from her hands, the margins filled with my scribbles. And something inside me hardened again. If I quit, Trent won. If I quit, her legacy died with me. The next day, I met Julian at the warehouse again. He was already spreading maps across the table, his notebook open. "We can't outspend him," Julian said, "but we can outsmart him." We doubled down on community. He laid out the idea: a traveling pop-up tasting tour, hitting neighborhoods Trent couldn't touch. Secret menus, announced last minute online, tickets selling out in minutes. Each stop telling a story, connecting people to the origins of every dish. It would be underground, grassroots, authentic, and it would expose Trent as the fraud he was. I hesitated. What if nobody comes? Julian smiled. Then we make them remember why they loved you in the first place. We launched in a converted bookstore, just 20 people crammed between dusty shelves and fairy lights. I told stories as I served, about my grandmother's masa, about nights in college kitchens, about the first time I sold food from a truck window. The guests leaned in, laughed, nodded, asked questions. They weren't just eating, they were experiencing. When I handed out churros dipped in Vietnamese coffee, one guest whispered, This is what Fork and Flame is pretending to be." The words landed like a promise. Word spread faster than I imagined. Every pop-up sold out. Photos flooded Instagram, tacos on mismatched plates, tamales unwrapped in candlelight, churros dusted in sugar against brick walls. Hashtags sprouted, Sable's Originals Food with Soul, Taste. The truth critics started showing up uninvited, scribbling notes furiously. Food bloggers called it a revolution. For the first time, I felt momentum shift, but I also knew Trent wouldn't sit back quietly. He'd see this movement, feel it biting at his ankles. And sure enough, one night after a sold-out tasting, as I packed up my gear, my phone buzzed. A message. From an unknown number. "You're playing with fire, Ortega." And fire burns. The text haunted me. "You're playing with fire, Ortega." And fire burns. I told myself it was just an empty threat, a desperate jab from a man losing control. But somewhere deep down, I knew Trent wasn't bluffing. And it didn't take long for him to prove me right. 2 days later, we were setting up for a pop-up in a rented art gallery. The tables were dressed, the string lights humming, the smell of spices filling the air. Then I opened the cooler. My heart stopped. Every container of marinated meat was ruined, the lids cracked open, the food spoiled, reeking of vinegar and rot. Hours of prep gone, hundreds of dollars wasted. Julian swore under his breath. Someone tampered with this. No question. I wanted to collapse right there on the tile floor. 20 guests were already waiting outside, buzzing with excitement. But quitting wasn't an option. Not now. I took a breath, scanning the pantry. A bag of masa, a crate of mangoes, a box of onions, garlic, peppers. We pivot, I said. That night we served antojitos, street snacks my grandmother used to make when money was tight. Quick grilled masa patties with fresh salsa, mango tossed with chili and lime, churros fried on the spot in sizzling oil. The menu was bare bones, stripped down, improvised. But the guests ate in silence, then broke into applause. One critic pulled me aside and whispered, "This was more real than any five-course meal. You made scarcity taste like abundance." I nearly cried on the spot. But as I scrubbed dishes after everyone left, anger simmered in my chest. Trent wasn't just trying to compete anymore, he was trying to destroy me. And if he thought sabotage would scare me off, he had no idea who he was dealing with. The next week, it got worse. A shipment of fresh produce never arrived, lost, in transit. My truck was keyed overnight, the paint gouged like claw marks. A fake event page popped up online. La Llama Roja pop-up, free food. Dozens showed, demanding plates I couldn't serve, and stormed off furious when I turned them away. Each hit chipped at my confidence, like he was tightening a noose around my neck. Julian tried to keep me centered, but even he admitted, "This is more than business. He's waging war." One night, after a disaster of a pop-up where only half the guests showed because of the fake page confusion, I sat in my truck long after midnight. The hum of the fridge was the only sound. My hands smelled of smoke and sugar, my body aching. For the first time, I let myself whisper the thought I'd been avoiding. Maybe he'll win. Maybe I wasn't strong enough. Maybe I'd just be another forgotten food truck story, while Trent's name lit up neon signs across downtown. Tears blurred the recipe binder sitting open beside me. My grandmother's handwriting looked like it was fading, disappearing before my eyes. I pressed my forehead to the counter and let myself break. Then, ping. A notification on my phone. A video. Someone had filmed Trent at a private investor dinner bragging. His voice was slurred, his grin wolfish. "Yeah, Ortega thinks she invented fusion. Please, I took her little taco gimmicks and made them profitable. No one remembers nobody's. By the time I'm downtown, she'll be a footnote." My hands shook as I replayed it. Proof. Actual proof. I forwarded it to Julian, who immediately called. "Sable, this is it. This is the crack in his armor. We use this. We blow it up." But I hesitated. If I released the video, it wouldn't just hurt Trent. It could backfire, look petty, even ruin my reputation if people thought I was just slinging mud. The weight of the decision pressed heavy. Did I fight dirty like him? Or did I find another way? As I debated, another message came through. This time, from an anonymous account. Just one line. "You're not the only one he's stolen from." Call me, my pulse spiked. Because if that was true, if there were others, then Trent's empire wasn't just built on my recipes. It was built on lies stacked high like a house of cards. And maybe, just maybe, I'd found the match to burn it all down. The anonymous message burned in my inbox. "You're not the only one he's stolen from." Call me? I paced my apartment, the city lights spilling through the blinds, my phone sweating in my palm. It could be a trap. Another mind game. But what if it wasn't? Finally, I dialed. The line clicked, and a woman's voice answered. Low. Careful. "You don't know me, Sable. Name's Kara. I used to run a food stall down in Eugene." I froze. Used to. Until Trent came through. Ate my food, asked me questions, even offered to mentor me. Next thing I knew, my signature lemongrass chicken skewers were on his menu at a festival in Salem. My business tanked. He walked away richer. My stomach nodded. This wasn't just me. Over the next week, more voices surfaced. Julian tracked them down through food forums, old Yelp reviews, word of mouth. A baker from Tacoma, a vegan chef from Bend, even a retired food trucker who claimed Trent had stolen his branding style years back. Each story was the same. Trent swooped in, copied their ideas, spread rumors to undercut them, then rode off with their recipes polished as his own. It wasn't just rivalry, it was a pattern, a system. I felt sick and furious. Julian leaned across the warehouse table, his notebook full of arrows and names. We're not just telling your story anymore. We're telling all of them. A collective voice. A reckoning. He outlined the plan. A culinary integrity tour, but bigger. Not just tastings. An exposé. Each stop featuring a chef Trent had stolen from, serving their original dishes, sharing their stories. The idea was electric, but terrifying. What if people don't care? I asked. What if they think we're just bitter has-beens? Julian shook his head. Then we give them something they can't ignore. Nostalgia. Flavor. Truth. We reached out to Kara first. She agreed, voice shaking but determined. Then others followed. At our first planning session, I looked around the warehouse at a mismatched circle of chefs, bakers, and cooks. They were older, younger, all exhausted by years of being erased. I stood up, heart pounding. Trent thinks he can rewrite food history, but tonight, we start writing it back. A cheer rose up, small but fierce. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. We launched the tour in a community center with peeling paint and folding chairs. Kara grilled her skewers, the air thick with lemongrass and char. A baker named Luis served spiced conchas he said Trent once mocked, then later repackaged as fusion brioche. I stood at the front, telling my story, then stepping back so they could tell theirs. People listened. Cameras rolled. Food critics scribbled furiously. By the end of the night, hashtags exploded across Instagram and Twitter. Hashtag stolen flavors, hashtag culinary integrity, hashtag forked by flame. Of course, Trent struck back hard. The very next morning, a PR statement hit the press. Baseless accusations from disgruntled competitors. Fork and Flame stands for originality and excellence. Photos of his polished new brick and mortar flooded the feeds, sleek black tiles, neon logo glowing like a crown. And then came the hit piece, a glossy article in a lifestyle magazine painting Trent as Portland's golden boy, the visionary behind the city's food revolution. My name wasn't mentioned once. It was like watching him erase me all over again. That night, I sat alone in the warehouse after everyone left. The table still smelled of lemongrass, sugar, cinnamon. But my chest felt hollow. Could we really win against a man with investors, PR firms, journalists in his pocket? Or were we just shouting into the void, hoping someone would care? I flipped open my grandmother's binder, tracing her handwriting. She'd written in the margin of one recipe, "Flavor tells the truth, even if people lie." The words burned into me. The next morning, as I packed for another pop-up, my phone rang. It was the Gazette critic, the same one who'd judged the cook-off weeks earlier. His voice was sharp, urgent. "Sable. You need to see something. Meet me in an hour. And don't tell anyone else." My pulse spiked, because the way he said it, it sounded like he'd uncovered something big, something that could change everything. The critic's voice still echoed in my head as I drove across Portland. "Meet me. Don't tell anyone else." The streets blurred past in streaks of neon and shadow. My palms sweated on the steering wheel. I didn't know if this was salvation or another trap. We met in a quiet coffee shop on the east side. The critic sat in the corner, his black notebook resting on the table like a weapon. He didn't waste time. "I've been digging," he said, pushing a folder toward me. Inside were printed emails, investor memos, and contracts. My eyes darted across the pages. Trent hadn't just stolen recipes. He'd been lying to investors, claiming he invented dishes, faking market research, even inflating sales numbers. One email jumped out like fire on the page. These dishes test well with Gen Z audiences. Credit the concept to Fork and Flame. No need to mention the original source. The original source. Me, Kara, Luis, all of us. The critic leaned closer. If this goes public, it won't just tarnish him. It could collapse his entire investor deal. Fraud, misrepresentation, serious consequences. My heart pounded. This was the smoking gun we'd prayed for. But fear crawled up my throat. If I go after him with this, he'll come for me harder. What if it backfires? What if I lose everything? The critic's gaze softened. You've already lost so much. Don't let him write the ending too. I drove back to the warehouse with the folder on the passenger seat, the weight of it pressing into me like a brick. Julian was waiting. The moment he saw the papers, his eyes widened. This is it, Sable. This is the nail in his coffin. But I couldn't shake the doubt. Releasing this wasn't just about revenge. It was about risking everything. My reputation, my future, even the fragile trust we'd built with the community. Do we go public? I asked. Julian didn't hesitate. Hell yes, but not alone. We make it part of the movement, the story of all of us. We gathered the other chefs, Kara, Luis, the rest, around the warehouse table. I laid out the papers, the evidence glowing under the harsh fluorescent light. One by one they read. Gasps, curses, silent nods. Kara's hands shook as she closed the folder. This is justice. We can't let him bury us anymore. So we built the plan. A press event disguised as a pop-up, where we'd not only serve the stolen dishes but reveal the receipts. Food and truth, side by side. But Trent wasn't stupid. Word must have leaked because suddenly, shadows pressed closer. A black SUV parked near my truck for hours. Anonymous numbers spammed my phone with threats. One night, after closing, I found the warehouse door pried open. Nothing stolen, but the message was clear. We're watching you. Julian wanted to call the cops, but I shook my head. We can't rely on them. We do this ourselves. Still, every creak of the floorboards kept me up at night. Every shadow felt like him, closing in. The day of the press event loomed closer. My nerves stretched thin, my stomach a knot of fire. As I was prepping masa dough at dawn, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't anonymous. It was Trent. One message, clean and sharp. Cancel your little circus, or I'll ruin you for good. I stared at the screen, flour dust on my fingers, heart racing. Because this wasn't just another bluff. I could feel it. He was about to make his biggest move yet. The morning of the press event should have been filled with nerves and adrenaline. Instead, it was chaos. I pulled up to the warehouse only to find the streets swarming with trucks, reporters, and flashing cameras. Except none of them were here for me. Trent had beaten me to the punch. Across the street, his shiny new brick and mortar glittered under a giant banner. Fork and Flame grand opening, press exclusive. Reporters crowded the sidewalk, snapping photos as Trent posed with scissors in hand, ready to cut the ribbon. And there he was, grinning like the devil himself, speaking into microphones. Fork and Flame isn't just a restaurant. It's the future of Portland dining. Innovation, originality, excellence. That's what we stand for. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Before I could even unload a single pan, my phone buzzed with notifications. A smear campaign was live, slick videos accusing me of being unstable, unprofessional, desperate for attention. Fake testimonials from former employees claiming I stole recipes myself. One post even showed a doctored screenshot of me supposedly begging Trent for mentorship. It was a perfectly orchestrated strike. While I was preparing to expose him, he'd already painted me as the liar. I slammed the cooler shut so hard my knuckles ached. My chest heaved with fury and panic. Julian grabbed my shoulders. "Sable, breathe. This is exactly what he wants, to rattle you before the event." But the weight of it pressed down on me. What if people believed him? What if the critics I invited were already convinced I was nothing but a fraud? I thought of my grandmother's binder in the passenger seat, the ink, the stories, the truth, and I forced myself to stand taller. "No," I said, "we don't cancel. We go harder." By 6 p.m., the warehouse was full. Bloggers, critics, even a local news crew, all buzzing with curiosity. I could feel the doubt in the room, the unspoken question. Wasn't she the one Trent just exposed? My throat tightened. But then I caught Julian's nod from across the room, Kara's steady gaze, Luis's clenched fists. We weren't just fighting for me anymore. We were fighting for all of us. I stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Tonight," I began, "you're not just tasting food. You're tasting history. And for too long, that history has been stolen." I unveiled the folder the critic had given me, laying out the contracts, the emails, the receipts. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. "This," I said, voice steady despite the fire in my chest, "is proof. Proof that Fork and Flame built its empire on lies, on recipes stolen from me, from Kara, from Luis, from so many others." I pointed to the dishes spread across the table, the lemongrass skewers, the conchas, my bulgogi tacos. These flavors were born from us, from struggle, from family, from memory, not from him. The room erupted in whispers, reporters scribbling, cameras flashing. But just as I thought the tide was turning, the warehouse doors slammed open, and in walked Trent. His suit gleamed under the lights, his smile razor-sharp. He strode in like he owned the place, clapping slowly. "Well, well. Quite the performance, Ortega." He turned to the cameras. "But let's be clear, none of this is verifiable. Anyone can print fake emails, make up stories, cry victim when they can't keep up." He leaned closer, his voice low but dripping venom. "And you? You're nothing but a bitter little fraud." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some looked at me with sympathy, others with doubt. I felt the room slipping, my throat dry, my pulse hammering. But then, before I could answer, Julian stepped forward, holding up his phone. "Funny you should say that, Trent," he said loudly, eyes locked on him. "Because I think everyone here deserves to hear your own words." He hit play, and the recording of Trent bragging about stealing my recipes filled the room. Gasps, shouts, reporters scrambling to capture every second. Trent's smug grin faltered for the first time. The moment Julian hit play, the room changed. Trent's drunken voice filled the warehouse. "I took her little taco gimmicks and made them profitable. No one remembers nobodies." Every syllable echoed like a hammer striking metal. Reporters lunged forward, phones raised, bloggers typed furiously. The critic from the Gazette nearly fell out of his chair, scribbling notes like his pen was on fire. For the first time, Trent looked cornered. His eyes darted, his smirk faltered. He muttered something under his breath, then turned on his heel and stormed out, cameras chasing after him. It felt like victory. But victories, I was learning, are rarely clean. By morning, the recording was everywhere. Clipped, memed, hashtagged. #ForkedByFlame trended on Twitter. TikToks mocked Trent's voice, splicing his profitable gimmicks line into parodies. Local news anchors replayed the audio with furrowed brows. Food forums lit up with debates about stolen recipes, authenticity, cultural appropriation. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. Maybe we'd finally done it. Maybe the truth was louder than his lies. Then, 2 days later, a knock at my apartment door. A man in a suit handed me a thick envelope. Defamation. Slander. Knowingly spreading false information to damage Fork and Flame's reputation. The words blurred as I read them. Trent wasn't going to defend himself in the kitchen. He was dragging me into a courtroom. And worse, he was demanding damages in the six figures. Money I didn't have. Money I'd never see in my lifetime. My knees buckled. He wasn't just trying to silence me. He was trying to bury me. That night, I sat in the warehouse with Julian and Kara, the lawsuit spread across the table. Julian's fists clenched. It's intimidation. He knows he can't win if the truth comes out, so he's trying to bleed you dry with legal fees. But I couldn't shake the fear gnawing at me. What if it works? I whispered. What if I lose? I don't have the money for lawyers. I don't even have the money for rent. Kara leaned forward, her eyes fierce. Sable, this isn't just your fight anymore. He's stolen from all of us. If he wants a war, then we fight together. The story exploded again, this time with a new headline. Fork and Flame sues food truck owner for defamation. Some commentators sided with me, calling it corporate bullying. Others sided with him, saying I was bitter and reckless. It was a battlefield, and every tweet, every article felt like another bullet flying overhead. I tried to keep working, keep cooking, but the weight of the lawsuit loomed over me like storm clouds. Every plate I served felt like it might be my last. Then, out of nowhere, an email arrived. Subject line: pro bono offer. Inside, a message from a law firm I'd never heard of. One of their junior partners had seen the story, had once been a food truck kid herself, and convinced her firm to take my case. For free. I stared at the screen, tears stinging my eyes. For the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't doomed. We gathered in the warehouse again, stacks of evidence spread out. Emails, contracts, recordings, witness testimonies. Julian grinned. If Trent wants a legal fight, then let's give him one. We've got the truth. We've got the receipts. And now, we've got lawyers. But just as hope began to flicker, my phone buzzed with a notification. A news alert. Trent had just announced his grandest stunt yet. A citywide fusion festival sponsored by his investors, complete with billboards, commercials, and celebrity endorsements. If he pulled it off, no matter what we proved in court, his empire would be cemented in the public's memory. I clenched my fists, fury burning through the fear. The war wasn't just in the courtroom anymore, it was on the streets. The billboard glared down at me from Burnside Street like a taunt. Fusion Festival, presented by Fork and Flame. Smiling celebrities holding tacos that weren't his to begin with. Neon flames painted across the skyline. It wasn't just a food event. It was a takeover. And if Trent pulled it off, he'd rewrite the narrative forever. In the warehouse, our circle of misfit chefs gathered around folding tables stacked with notes, menus, and borrowed projectors. Julian slammed his fist down. We can't let him own the conversation. If Fusion Festival is his coronation, we need something bigger, louder, real. Kara crossed her arms. We don't have his money, his PR machine, his investors. What do we have? I looked around the room, at their tired eyes, their stained aprons, their recipes scribbled in worn notebooks. We have the truth, I said, and the flavors people never forgot. We make our own festival. Silence. Then, slowly, nods all around. We called it the Feast of Truth. Pop-ups across the city on the same weekend as Fusion Festival. Secret locations revealed at the last minute on social media. Every stop featuring stolen originals, lemongrass skewers, conchas, bulgogi tacos, served with the story behind them. Instead of celebrities, we had community. Instead of sponsors, we had volunteers. Instead of glossy commercials, we had shaky TikToks shot on borrowed phones. But it felt alive. It felt dangerous. In the weeks leading up, the stress nearly broke me. Every day was a new hurdle. City permits mysteriously delayed, suppliers suddenly out of stock, angry emails warning us to back off. One night, as I scrubbed pans in the warehouse, Julian found me trembling. "What if we can't pull it off?" I whispered. "What if nobody shows?" He crouched beside me, gripping my hand. "Then we go down fighting. But I don't think you realize how many people want you to win." Julian was right. On the Friday before the festival, a local cafe offered us their kitchen for free. A print shop donated flyers. A band volunteered to play live music. Even strangers pitched in, showing up to hang string lights, paint signs, chop vegetables. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was Portland's. The night before, I drove past Trent's Fusion Festival site. Giant tents, spotlights, corporate logos plastered everywhere. Trucks unloading cases of champagne. It looked untouchable. But then I thought of the binder on my passenger seat, my grandmother's handwriting reminding me, "Flavor tells the truth." And for the first time, instead of fear, I felt calm. This wasn't about matching his empire. It was about showing people the difference between a lie and a legacy. The morning of the festivals arrived. Trent's Fusion Festival blared across the airwaves, radio ads, TV spots, influencers tagging selfies at his gates. But at the same time, our first Feast of Truth pop-up opened in a dusty old theater downtown. I peeked out from behind the curtain, heart hammering. And what I saw made me gasp. A line, a long line, wrapping around the block. People holding handmade signs. "We stand with originals. Taste the truth." Hashtag forked by flame. Tears stung my eyes as Julian whispered beside me, "Sable." They came. The theater was shaking. Not from the old wooden floors beneath our feet, but from the sheer energy of the crowd packed inside. The line outside hadn't slowed. Volunteers scrambled to keep up, passing out tacos on napkins, conchas on paper plates, skewers sizzling fresh off borrowed grills. Every dish was served with a story. Kara stood at the front telling how her lemongrass skewers had been stolen. Luis held up a tray of conchas, his voice cracking as he described years of being erased. And when it was my turn, I looked out at the sea of faces, neighbors, bloggers, critics, even families with kids on their shoulders. "This," I said, lifting a plate of bulgogi tacos, "is more than food. It's memory, it's struggle, and it's ours." The room erupted. But just across town, Trent's Fusion Festival was in full swing. Spotlights blazed, celebrity chefs posed for cameras, influencers filmed glossy videos of neon cocktails and fusion dishes plated like fine art. From the outside, it looked like success, like dominance. But then, something strange started happening. Festival goers pulled out their phones. They scrolled. They saw hashtags, photos, videos, number sign. Taste the Truth was trending higher than number sign Fusion Festival. Some people started leaving. Whole groups walked out, heading toward our little theater instead. By mid-afternoon, reporters were splitting coverage between the two events. On one channel, Trent cutting ribbons, smiling for sponsors. On another, shaky footage of Kara handing skewers to a cheering crowd, me holding up my grandmother's binder like scripture. One journalist tweeted, "Corporate versus community. Fork and flame versus the Feast of Truth. This isn't just about food anymore. It's about integrity." Inside the theater, Julian burst through the doors with his phone raised. "They're rattled," he said. Fusion Festival attendance is dropping. People are literally walking out mid-bite to come here. The crowd roared. But before we could even breathe, another volunteer rushed in. Trent's on his way. With cameras. My heart stopped. Of course he wouldn't let us have this moment. Of course he'd come to crash it. An hour later, the theater doors swung open, and there he was. Trent. Expensive suit. PR team trailing behind him with cameras and microphones. He walked straight to the front, his smile tight, eyes cold. "Well," he said loudly, "looks like Ortega finally found a way to get a crowd. Too bad it's built on slander." Boos erupted. People shouted, "Liar!" and "Thief!" I stepped forward, binder in hand, my voice steady. "Funny, Trent. Because we've got proof. And unlike you, we don't need neon lights to tell the truth." He sneered. "The only truth is numbers. And I've got investors, sponsors, a downtown empire. You've got... what? A broken food truck and a pity parade?" The crowd bristled. Someone shouted back, "At least she's original?" The tension crackled like fire. Cameras rolled, reporters scribbled, social feeds lit up in real time. Trent leaned closer, his voice low but venomous, meant only for me. "You think this ends here? You've got no idea what I'm capable of." I held his gaze, my pulse hammering, and whispered back, "Neither do you." And as the room erupted into chants, "Taste the truth, taste the truth," I knew the final battle had only just begun. The chants still rang in my ears as Trent stormed out of the theater, his PR team scrambling behind him. For a moment, I thought we'd won. The crowd was electric, the reporters buzzing, hashtags flying faster than I could read. But I should have known. Trent wasn't the type to retreat quietly. By the next morning, the headlines had shifted. Ortega's Truth Festival, funded by competitors to smear Fork and Flame. Insider sources question authenticity of Ortega's claims. The articles cited anonymous insiders who alleged I'd doctored evidence, bribed critics, even staged the recording of Trent. It was a flood of lies, slick, professional, devastating. Julian slammed his phone down on the warehouse table. He's doubling down. He's trying to drown out the truth with noise. Kara muttered, "Classic playbook. When cornered, spread confusion." But I could see the fear in their eyes. It was working. Doubt was creeping back into the public conversation. Then came the gut punch. My landlord called. "Sable, I've had 3 different people reach out about your lease, offering double what you pay. Said you're going under anyway. I need to think about protecting my investment." Investors were circling my ruin like vultures. And Trent? He was buying up the block around his new restaurant, turning it into a glossy empire. Billboards, merchandise, even a cooking show rumored to be in development. It felt like he was everywhere. The law firm helping me filed motions to dismiss Trent's case, but he countered with more paperwork, dragging it out, forcing endless hearings. I sat in courtrooms staring across at him, his smug smile daring me to break. One day, during recess, he leaned close enough for me to hear. "You're exhausting yourself, Ortega. Give up now, and maybe I'll let you fade quietly. Keep pushing, and I'll make sure you never cook again." His breath reeked of arrogance, and I hated that part of me almost believed him. But then, an unexpected shift. More chefs started speaking out. A food trucker from Seattle posted a video of his stolen kimchi quesadilla recipe, calling Trent out by name. A retired vendor shared photos from years ago of dishes eerily identical to Fork and Flame's signature originals. The public began piecing it together. One blogger tweeted, "Too many coincidences. Too many stories. Maybe Ortega isn't the fraud here." The tide was turning. Slowly, shakily, but undeniably. That's when he made his boldest move yet. The following week, glossy invitations hit every critic, blogger, and influencer in town. The Fork and Flame Legacy Gala, one night only, witness the future of fusion dining. It was scheduled for the exact same night as our next Feast of Truth event. And the kicker? Rumors swirled that he was flying in celebrity chefs, paying them to vouch for him publicly. If they spoke in his defense, the narrative could swing back his way permanently. Julian tossed the invitation onto the table like it was poison. "He's going all in," he said. "If he pulls this off, it's over." The room went quiet. All eyes turned to me. I gripped my grandmother's binder, my fingers smudged with flour and ink. "We don't cancel," I said. My voice shook, but I didn't back down. "We fight fire with fire. If he's bringing out his biggest guns, then so are we." Kara leaned forward. "And what's that mean, Sable?" I swallowed hard, already feeling the weight of the idea forming in my chest. "It means we take the Feast of Truth out of warehouses and pop-ups. We take it to the streets. Same night as his gala. Everywhere at once. He wants to own Portland? Fine. Let's show him the city already belongs to us." The table erupted with nervous energy, fear and excitement blending in equal measure. And in the silence that followed, I knew the next move would decide everything.